guys, Matt Lemke here with 3Gamer Goggles, gamer-goggles.com, and welcome to Roleplaying Ramblings 3 Season 2. Today we're going to talk about storytelling. So in some ways this is largely advice for GMs. Generally, when you're a storyteller, you kind of have a path planned for your story or an idea and direction of where it's going to go. But when you're role-playing, it's not as cut and dry as I take notes, I put them on the table, and then I write my story. As an author, I like to, you have total control of your story. But when you introduce that to other people, they have their own ideas and their own concepts. And the other thing, too, is generally when you write a story, a novel, for example, you have 3 to 4 characters involved in it. You might have 6 to 8 characters involved in a campaign for a role-playing story, where each player is trying to develop the character for you. Whereas when you're writing a story, some major differences here, you create the concept and the personality of those characters. So players have a way or a habit of kind of throwing red herrings into your storyline and or hijacking it sometimes and making it go a different direction. And I think the number one rule for good storytelling within role-playing is that the GM is responsible to kind of keep the story on track. The previous 2 episodes talk about all kinds of different tips and tricks and strategies as to how you might do this. But there are different, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about a couple other things that can happen. So when players kind of hijack your story and you get off track a little bit, how do you handle bringing it back to your end goal? And the number one way to do that, I think, is you kind of let them go with that story and you bring closure to it. And you do it quickly. You don't make it take 2 or 3 game sessions. You try and tie it up in that session where it's introduced. And the reason why you do that is because if you develop that storyline too much, they may just go all the way off of everything that you've prepared, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because then you are a community and you are kind of moving fluently in the direction that path takes you. But I find it often frustrating when you get too far off track and all the hours of work that you put into your game become futile. You can always come back to it with another adventure or start over with another group, but that's just my take on it. And not every, there are people who are like, well, okay, we come, and they just wing it every day. They just wing it. And that's good. I wing it a lot. The other problem is your players sometimes get lost. And you have to help them out. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. But the thing that I want to make imperative here is that you don't tell them what to do. Because if you tell them what to do, they're going to feel railroaded. And railroading is not often a fun experience. So you have to show them. You have to guide them and nudge them along that path in a way that they don't feel railroaded. And there are a lot of different ways to do this. If you're good at taking notes, one of the best ways to do that is to subtly remind them of something that was important in a previous session that will help bring them back on track. Or so let's see here. Let's say that a player found a book, and the book has, how some books, I don't actually have any down here, some books are real fancy. Best example is Bibles. They're nice leather-bound books, right? And you open them up, and they have often built into the binding, they have little fabric bookmarks that can mark where you're at, so that you just grab the bookmark and you open the book, you slide it over, and you open the book to that page that you were last on, right? Wizards would probably have a lot of stuff like this because they got these really big, huge, massive spell books and research books from all their notes that they've taken as researchers, right? So they got all this stuff. So maybe a character found this book and he doesn't realize everything that's on it. and he gives it to somebody else to study for a little bit, and that particular character might realize that those bookmarks have a little bit more significance than the other player was researching, and then there's a clue as to something that they could go back and do, or bring them back on track. Um, that's pretty subtle. So it's introduced to a new player. The new player may or may not make a check. I would make him make a check and give him a little bit more information than was originally given to the first character, if you can remember that. And the reason why I would make the check is because then you're showing, not telling. The character was involved. The character is going to think whether or not it's true or not. They're going to think that they did something to move the story forward. And that's what's important about subtly brushing railroading underneath the carpet. LGM's railroad. It's just a matter of doing it with finesse. We all do. I mean, it's a story that we want to keep on track, and in order to keep it on track, we kind of have to nudge you in certain directions. That's what we do. That's our job. Now, when I create the story, I like... Okay, so I'm going to back up before I do that. There's games like Rise of the Rune Lords, and... I don't know if I can get through it that fast. Whatever's on top. The Curse of Straw. So, there's games like these that are kind of like sandbox settings, where I feel a little bit more limited when I do stuff like this. But probably I should, right? I think of myself as the creator of the story, unless I'm doing something like this. And then, second, after I've created my story and my storyline, I will kind of feel like a compass or a GPS. It's your job to direct the players in the right direction. And I think if you kind of get that mindset of, okay, I have to be able to do this, you'll help the flow of your campaign. Now, for those of you that cook or understand anything, just remember your story is not liquid. It's not as free-flowing as water. It's more like taffy. It takes more than one person to make. For those of you that don't know how to make taffy, basically you put water and sugar in a pot with some flavor, and you boil it until you get this sticky mass of goo. And then you put on gloves, you put some paper on the floor, and you basically play tug of war with another person. And that is your party. You pull, you fold, you pull, you fold. And that's how you make taffy. And that is a lot like what you do as a role player and a GM telling a story. It's give and take. You pull, that's the take. You bring it back, that's the give. Now, backing up a step, boil water, right? Add sugar, flavor, and coloring. I left out the coloring. And when you're telling a story, the coloring is basically everything that you need to fill in the blanks. So it's clues, it's tips, it's tricks, it's NPCs. It's the whole 9 yards. So basically, as a GM, I think one of the things you have to learn to do is consume everything your players give you. Then you have to learn how to pick and choose some things. A lot of times when I tell a story, I like these big table desktop calendars. I save the months. I tear the page off, I put the blank up, and I take notes. Okay, this is this character. And I dedicate one whole page to every character in every game. And the reason I do that is like I can sit there, I can put the character in the middle, I can draw this thing, all these little different lines of how the characters are affecting each other and what's important to the character. He's got an interest over here. And then I kind of put it in relation. The farther it is from the character, the less likely it is to influence my storyline. But it's something that might be important to that particular character to allow that player to feel like they're fulfilling more development within their character. And I think that's one of the key concepts to making a good group is everybody has to want to be there. And the easiest way to make players want to be there is to have them develop their characters. And they have to do that in a give-take fashion within your storyline or within this storyline. You could play the Curse of Strahd 100 different times with the same character, have a different experience if each one of those characters has a different personality. And that's what I'm talking about. There's the difference within the role and the character and how they work within your story. Sure, if you play a paladin 100 different times with 100 different personalities, certain things are going to be repetitive. I'm not going to argue that. But the experience will always be a different experience. Because the GM, the player, and the other players are all working together to tell that story. So, where does that bring us with the cohesion of moving forward and telling a story? Well, I think the story has to have a certain amount of ownership by the GM. And I don't know if there's any magical formula that's like 60-40 or 70-30 or anything of that nature. I think it's just a matter of learning things like paying attention to the body language of your players. And, you know, when a player raises an eyebrow, that's something that's important. Those are types of things that you need to be able to learn about. Or the excitement in the tone of their voice. Oh, another gem. So maybe it's time to stop giving the rogue gems, right? Or, oh man, I can't believe I found that. Or, wait, can I have that dagger? You don't need that dagger. You've got enough daggers. I really like that dagger. Paying attention to things like that. And you know, some of these tips are trivial, but for newer GMs, some of these things are really solid. And then the other trick is basically learning how to bring your story back on track. That is one of the hardest things to do sometimes, and that's just good GMing. I mean, it's something that you have to learn. I suppose learning to plan your tips and your events in advance is really good. If you're a GM that comes in and does a lot of premeditated planning, I think it's important that you have enough ways to get around things that your players don't realize that you railroaded them. Because a lot of premeditation is kind of like railroading in the sense that you have a very solid, rigid line. Some GMs are really good at using that solid, rigid line and keeping the players on that A, B, C, D path. I am not. So I can't really talk too much about doing that or how it's done. I used to be like that. But I got tired of being frustrated that the players didn't want to do what I wanted them to do. And I felt like after playing with one GM who said, you can't do that, I will kill you. And basically, it was a dwarf who hated goblins, and the dwarf ran over and attacked the goblin. He's like, you're not supposed to attack the goblins because, well, that wasn't the design and the intent of the story. But the player played his character in character because he has a hatred for goblins. He attacked them. And then a lightning bolt came out of the sky for no apparent reason and killed the dwarf. Now, I wasn't even in that game, and I saw that happen, and I was just like, okay, lesson learned. Never do that. The kid was 8 years old that was playing the dwarf, and he was pretty bent out of shape. That did not help the community. In fact, that was one of the last times I ever saw that GM. And I'm glad, in a way, I mean, from a GM perspective, I'm glad that I've never seen him GM. He still does other games and stuff like that, and I see him around playing things like 40K. But the whole concept of working together to tell the story is important, but at the same time, I think the GM has to take the ultimate responsibility for keeping things on track, and therefore they kind of have to own the story. It's theirs. Even if it's something like this, I mean, yeah, this is Wizards of the Coast story, and Rise of the Rune Lords is Pathfinder's story. But when you are telling it, it's yours. Because I can run this 20 times and never tell the same story. I don't know if I can run this 20 times and never tell the same story. I'm not that good at horror. So, anyway, to bring it all back together. Things get out of hand. It's the GM's job to control it and make it happen. And come together to that fine point. Now, the easiest thing to do is to respect that giving of push and pull by making that taffy that I talked about. Give and take. That is one of the most important things about building this community. Because, well, when you do that, you build a relationship. And that is really what all of this is about. You have a community relationship and you're telling a story with your community. Some stories are going to be a little different. That's fine. As a GM, you might tell the story in 3 or 4 different communities. And you might have different experiences. It's just going to make you a better GM. And in the end, I kind of think it's going to make you a better person. So, I hope that this was good for you guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know. Please subscribe to me, guys. Share, like, check out my Kickstarter. It is definitely on Kickstarter right now. There should be a link like here-ish somewhere, maybe. All depends on whether or not YouTube allows it to be a site. They should. And if this is not up before Christmas, have a happy holiday. If it's up before Christmas, have a good Christmas. If it's up before Hanukkah, have a good Hanukkah. If you're celebrating Yule, have a good Yule. Or whatever else other people celebrate that I'm unaware of at this time of year. Which I'm sure there's some things. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. My Kickstarter, I made a game for you guys. And I'm making a bestiary for role players. I'm stoked. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good day.